We must now select my successor, and it's only one man the opposition will accept.
He stands for one thing, and one thing only, himself.
Why have I been forced to send for Churchill? His record is a catastrophe.
I had always had on my shelves a series of books. I've always loved speeches and the art of great rhetoric, and in all these books you would invariably find at least one speech by Winston Churchill, and often two or three. And at some point early on, I realized that three of the greatest speeches ever delivered were by Winston Churchill, and they were written and delivered within a 4-week period of each other. And a little bit of diving into the research started to give me a sense of what incredible forces were at work that spurred him to this outpouring of magnificent rhetoric. He wrote more words in his lifetime, published words, than Dickens and Shakespeare combined. He was a man in the core of his rather poetic soul, a man who believed that words mattered, that they counted, and could in fact be enlisted to change the world. And that's really all he had. So against the combined forces of all the terrible facts on the ground that were coming back from France, and all the forces of his own party that were saying, do a deal with Hitler, it's the only sensible moral thing to do, he had these words. And the writing of those words was his ladder out of the darkness.
My task as an editor when I was cutting the film was to keep that sense of thriller going through that went through the script, and that Joe filmed it like a thriller. I mean, there's a lot of dialogue scene, it's true, but because of the looks between the characters and the looks between Halifax and Chamberlain, and you know, there's the real sense that the stakes are very high, and the future of the world is decided on those few conversations, and you know, it's about it's a bit of a, for me, I always saw them like a standoff Western Sergio Leone type, you know, where people are really studying each other by just gazing and seeing an attack at the moment where they're most vulnerable. And that's what I thought was great for me to cut this material. That I had tons of this moment.
A war cabinet has been convened. Correction. Has been formed.
Formed.
A war cabinet has been formed of 5 members representing, with the opposition parties, the unity of the nation.
The great thing about this movie is that it shows off this treasure of an actor, Gary Oldman, who, when you stop and think about this amazing career, he's been nominated once in his career for an Oscar for Tinker Tailor Soldier Spy. Give me a sense of how, in your mind, he embodied what you were trying to convey in taking this iconic man and breathing life into him.
A three-dimensional Churchill had never really been presented to us. We'd always got an iconic kind of stereotype who was a little bit pugnacious, little gruff, brandy swilling, cigar smoking kind of caricature. I thought no one had ever tried to capture his wit and his humor and his sprightliness. And even though he was 65 at the time of this movie, he had a spring in his step and a twinkle in his eye. And that mischievous little puckish kind of quality that was clearly there in his writing had never, ever been captured. And Gary completely got that. And so it's unlike any other Churchill portrayal I think it has ever been committed. And I think it would be hard for anybody to take on Churchill after this role. It's so definitive.
I think the most amazing thing for me looking at the daily material coming in was to see how much Gary managed to describe the vulnerable side of Churchill. You know, his irrational side. So he would perform this moment where suddenly he would scream and yell, and he would just do it with such naturality and such a feelings of a man who he knew that he wasn't quite perfect. You know, he had a lot of irrational moment, and the screaming and yelling plus the sweetness of his relationship with his wife. I think there's so much variation in that performance that really made it very round. And Gary is one of the few actors, I think, in the world who's able to achieve that array of palette of performance.